Hi, I'm Susan Herskowitz and welcome to the Uranian Astrologer. I've gotten a few requests from people that they'd like to learn how to put their own charts on the dial, and so I decided to put together this short tutorial on how you can draw up your own chart at home, and you don't need a computer program. As a matter of fact, I personally prefer drawing up the charts and still do whenever I do readings. I draw up the charts manually and use the dial manually because I really feel you get such an illumination of the patterns and you can see them much more easily on a hand-drawn chart. So and it's so easy to use the Uranian dial. Once you get the gist of it, it's really, really fun. And at the end of this tutorial, what I'm going to do is give you the sources for the two really necessary interpretation books that will help you interpret all of the midpoints that you're looking at. So let's get started. There are a few things that you'll need to set up your chart on the Uranian dial. First, you'll need a chart, and you can obtain a chart by going to my website, theuranianastrologer.com, clicking on what is Uranian Astrology, and then setting up and exploring your chart on the Uranian dial, and there you'll find all the instructions on obtaining a chart. So the next thing you want to do is print out the dial, and there's a link there also to click on where you can print out download and print out a 7-inch Uranian dial. And what you want to do, I like to print out the dial on like a heavier cardstock. What I also use, if you have it, although most people don't, is I print out my dials on plastic. But if you don't have that, a piece of paper will be just fine. Then what you want to do is carefully cut out the dial and then puncture the center with a push pin or a needle or something. But very carefully, because it's very important that it's centered. The next things you'll need is a pen, a fine tip pen. I prefer like a 0.5 type of fountain pen, and you'll also need a thumbtack. That same thumbtack you use to puncture the hole in the dial, that's what the dial is going to actually spin on. And then you need some type of about 6-inch straight edge ruler. So the final thing you need is either painter's tape or architectural drafting dots, any kind of tape that doesn't rip paper once you have taped it. We use the tape just to hold our dials in place as we construct and lay out the chart. So the next thing we want to do is take our thumbtack and center it really well on our piece of paper or cardstock. Stick the thumbtack through and we can place our dial on, and you'll see the dial spins beautifully. So we want to put, this is the Aries point at the top, and we want to put that facing the top of the page, and then we want to take our tape and just tape everything down. We want to tape the paper and the dial. So then we want to tape the dial down. Doesn't really matter where. If you need to put a planet where the tape is, you could just pull up the tape and move it. And the first thing we want to do is take our ruler and our pen, and we want to mark the Aries point. Now the Aries point is the world axis, and that's also what anchors the chart. Now the dial is separated into 3 sections. And each section is 30 degrees. So each of these sections are 5 degrees, and this is 30 degrees. And it's separated into cardinal, fixed, and mutable parts. So when we begin to put our planets on the dial, in this first section, what goes is all of the cardinal signs. Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. They will all go in this 30-degree spectrum here. Then all of the fixed signs will go in the next section, which is Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. And then in the last section, we have the mutable signs of Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. So the next thing we're going to do is take our chart, and I'm using the chart of Pope Francis as an example. I've printed this one from astro.com, and if you follow the directions on my website, you will see how to also add all of the trans-Neptunian planets into the chart. So if we go to the bottom, we'll have all the points we need. We have the ascendant and the meridian, as well as all of the planets and the trans-Neptunians. Now, if you like to use asteroids, part of fortune, nodes, Chiron, anything you'd like to put in there, you can put on the dial as well. So we're going to take our first point, and we're gonna first put in the angles, and we're going to, so the ascendant is at 10 degrees 0 seconds, or 10 degrees 1 second of Cancer. So again, we have our three sections, the cardinal, fixed, and mutable sections. Cancer is a cardinal point. And so we're going to go to 10 degrees, which would be out here, and 1 second. And we'll take our ruler and we will mark that point, and then we'll write A for ascendant and 10 degrees Cancer 1 second. Then we'll go to our next point, which is the meridian, and the meridian is a fixed point, and it is at 0 degrees 4 seconds of Taurus. So we're going to go to our fixed section. We're going to go to 0 degrees and 4 seconds and put in our meridian. Now it's really important to also put exactly what degree and second and sign each placement is at. So this is 0 degrees Taurus, 4 seconds. Then we're going to go to our next point, which is the sun, and the sun is in a mutable sign, and at 25 degrees 54 seconds of Sagittarius. So we will go to our mutable section and go to 25 degrees. 54 seconds. So it's approximately right there, and we'll put in the sun at 25 degrees Sagittarius, 54 seconds. So now I've gone ahead and put in all the points and all the trans-Neptunians, all the planets, all the angles. I also put in Chiron as well as the North Node. And what you want to do is you want to double check everything before you take these pieces of tape off. I find that about half the time I draw up these charts that I've put something in the wrong place. So you want to check, you want to go through the sun, 2554 of Sag, make sure it's in the right section and at the right place. And what I also always have is some whiteout, because I find that that's really the easiest way to make corrections. So once it's checked, you can remove the tape on the dial. Don't remove the tape on the piece of paper, because you want that to be anchored. And you are free to start looking at midpoints. Now, before we get started looking at midpoints, I have listed a couple of reference books on my website that are really necessary in order to start exploring your chart. And those two books are Alfred Witte's Rules for Planetary Pictures, and also Eberton's The Combination of Stellar Influences. These both of these books are really Bibles for Uranian astrology and really for any mode of astrology that you're practicing, because they give you insight into the possible manifestations of planetary energies when they come together, and then also when they create this midpoint. So they're really wonderful books. The rules for planetary pictures also include all the trans-Neptunians. So we can go to, say, Mercury Chronos, and we turn to the page, and we've got lofty mental qualities, a noble way of thinking, honorable thinking, great thoughts. And then if they form a midpoint with another point, say Venus, we have acquaintance through great thoughts or ideas, soft artistic way of expression, and so on. Now, these interpretations were never meant by Witte to be taken literally. They are merely meant as suggestive. And the point is that you need to bring in your own intuition and your own creativity as to what it might mean in a particular chart. So we can also go to Eberton's The Combination of Stellar Influences, and this is also another wonderful book. We can go to the Moon Meridian midpoint structure, and you can see that it's very in-depth in terms of how that planetary combination manifests. Now, it doesn't contain all of the trans-Neptunians, but it does contain the planets and the angles. So now let's start exploring some midpoints. When we go to Pope Francis's chart, the first point I always like to take a look at is the meridian, because in Uranian astrology, the meridian is really one of the most important points because it represents the soul. It's the soul's essence. It's the point of individuality. It's what you really want, regardless of whether it brings attention and recognition from the outside. So how we would first start to find midpoints is we would look for things that are equidistant to either, there is this axis, that is this Aries pointer, and so we look for points, and actually the first one I'm going to bring up is node Capito. Now we want to go to the center, meaning that we want to find the place that is exactly equal on this side, and here it's about 8.5 degrees, and also 8.5 degrees this way, and we have a midpoint that also makes a midpoint with Vulcanus and somewhat Saturn. If we go back to the meridian, you see it's slightly off, but that's what's called the orb. So when I'm considering the meridian, I'll go a degree on either side. So that's within the correct orb. Now let's go to our handy dandy rules for planetary pictures, page 150, to the node Capito midpoint structure, and we find to prepare the way for marriage, familiar connections, the founding or associations. Now clearly Pope Francis is not married, but Capito has everything to do with partnerships, and node has to do with connections. And with the meridian, there is a strong desire for personal relationships, for business partnerships, because Capito is all about all types of partnerships. So you really have to come in and use your creativity, your intuition, to see what that's feeling like. And then with the Vulcanus, also in that midpoint structure, Vulcanus has to do with everything that is very mighty and powerful. So basically what this is beginning to tell us is that that he has very influential and powerful partnerships, that there's a strong desire for that. And lastly, the Saturn's a little bit off, but it's still there. And where we go to under node Capito with the Saturn, it tells us about disillusion, of or separation of familiar or social connections. Now, it can mean that, but you also have to bring the creativity back in and realize that Saturn can be really solid things as well. So you have to really start looking into the chart to see how all of these things might be manifesting. But it can be partnerships that break up, but it also can be really strong and solid partnerships. So let's take a look at another midpoint structure. If we go back to our chart, there is a Neptune Apollon midpoint structure, exactly 3.5 degrees to either side and very close to the meridian. Also, again, it picks up on that Vulcanus. Not so much, we're over a degree on the Saturn, but definitely the meridian and the Vulcanus. Now, Neptune Apollon, if we go to our rules book, is all about deception and disappointment and disillusion. But it's also about occult science. So you really have to bring your creativity into this one, because Neptune can be many, many different things. On one hand, Neptune can be disillusion, disappointment, deception, but on the other hand, it can be all things that are high up, spiritually, creatively, in some type of humanitarian helping profession. So, and connected with the Apollon, which just expands things. So you really need to look at that very carefully and kind of go at it with an athletic stance in terms of what the interpretation is, and you have to keep yourself open to looking at other things before you come to a decision on what that's about. Now, there are also midpoint structures on the side. That is, if we look at the structure of the dial, we have this axis, but there's also these very large black points, which is the axis that is 22.5 degrees from this main axis. So on the side, we find in Pope Francis's chart many different midpoints. Now, the midpoints on the side have a little bit less emphasis than the ones that are more direct with the meridian. But in any case, we have a Mercury Poseidon, and I give a smaller orb for the points on the side as well. Now, the Mercury Poseidon midpoint structure, which is page 189 of your rules book, is all about ideas and thoughts, lofty thinking, higher-minded thinking, and with the meridian, as it says, to be the carrier of an idea. And Vulcanus, again, Vulcanus brings power, might, and force to anything that it touches. Now, this was just a tutorial to get you started in terms of setting up the dial, putting in all the points, learning how to use it, learning how to find midpoints, learning how to use the reference books. But I really encourage you to really go in and explore all of the dial and see if you can start to see patterns that emerge. Now, in addition to the meridian, you can go to any midpoint structure, but I really like to take a look at first the midpoint structures that are around the sensitive points. Now, the sensitive points in Uranian astrology are the meridian, the ascendant, the sun, the moon, the node, and the Aries point, which is at the top of the chart, which we discussed in the beginning of this tutorial. So, for instance, you can go to the meridian ascendant midpoint structure. And what I've done is, so you have the ascendant here and the meridian here that are equal distant to this main axis. And I went ahead and marked it meridian ascendant. And you can take a look at what's around there. We can go to the ascendant midpoint structure. We can go to, say, meridian Aries midpoint structure. All these combinations, all these different combinations, rather, of the 6 sensitive points We can go to Sun Moon, which is one of the most important midpoint structures in Uranian astrology in terms of personal relationship. We can go to Moon Meridian, which actually in Pope Francis's chart is a very strong midpoint structure. It just contains a lot of information. Moon Ascendant, which is approximately, it didn't mark it, but it's about right here. So we'll go ahead and mark this, Moon Ascendant. And Moon Ascendant in the early life represents the mother. It's even more specific than the moon. So we can really go to any point we like. And then you can also start playing around. Go to Neptune. Go to Ascendant Mercury. Go to Jupiter Poseidon. Start to use your intuition as to how the chart is beginning to unfold and what points or midpoints might be relevant. So I hope you enjoyed this very short tutorial on how to set up your Uranian chart, and I hope it gets you started. On a different note, if you do find that you enjoy the exploration of charts on the dial, I encourage you to use a little bit different of a system, and instead of using the piece of paper with the thumbtack through it, go to the store and buy yourself one of these storage folders. They're clipboards, and you can put all your charts inside, and your little tools that you'll need: some tape, pens, push pin, and then put your push pin, and I have a very large one here, exactly through the center. And then instead of drawing your charts on a piece of paper or a cardstock, draw it on the back of a manila folder, and preferably a single tab folder, because it gives you more surface area to draw the chart. And then what happens is that you put the chart on the dial, and then the clip at the top helps you to hold the chart in place, and then you can just put your dial right on that push pin, and there you go. And a lot of your charts can be contained within here, and your tools, and it really is very useful way to have your Uranian charts and dial. So I hope you enjoyed this, and look for my next tutorial, which will go more in depth into finding the patterns within the Uranian chart.